That's it. So tonight I'm going to talk about Portainer. Before I start, anybody in the room already heard about it? That much? Two people, right? Good. Let's talk about it then. So, what's Portainer? Portainer, as it's written, is an open source administration UI for Docker. So, for those who knows about Docker, there's a few alternatives to manage your Docker environment. So you can use the CLI or other UIs, existing UIs. If you're a beginner with Docker, or if you are too intimidated by the Docker CLI, I recommend to have a look at Portainer. So during this talk, I'm going to present a bit how you can actually manage your Docker environments using Portainer, and I'm going to do one or two live demos to show you that. So what defines Portainer? I'm not sure if you can see well the light. Anyway, simplicity is the main word when you talk about Portainer. Every time we add a new feature or we create something inside Portainer, we focus a lot on the user experience. And as a result, the software is built to be used by any role in your IT department. It's not meant to be used only by developers or only by administrators, system administrators, but QA engineers or other roles as well. It's meant to be simple to use, but also simple to deploy. So it's actually built inside a container, so you can run it as a container. The image is really small, so you can get started pretty quick, and it runs everywhere. So we support a lot of architecture, and you can actually run Portainer on your Linux server or Windows Server as a Windows native container, on ARM, PowerPC. We support a lot of architectures. And finally, it's made for Docker and Docker only. We had users asking for, do you support Kubernetes? Nope, it's only made for Docker. So at the moment we support Docker standalones, standing from version 1.9 to the latest, as well as Docker Swarm standalone, so the previous orchestration tool of Docker, and the new Swarm one. And we support almost all the features, so all the things that you can do with the CLI, you can do that inside Portainer. So let's start with a quick demo. I'm going to show you quickly how you can deploy Portainer. Funny things with lights. So you can deploy Portainer and and manage a local Docker engine. So I got my Docker environment on my laptop, and I'm going to deploy Portainer and show you how you can actually manage Docker. So you need to use the Docker CLI to deploy Portainer. I'll try to do that with the mic as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run a Portainer container on my laptop. All right, so let me explain a bit what am I doing here. Yeah. Zoom a bit. So I'm going to run the Docker Portainer container. I'm going to expose the port 9000 of my host, which is the port on which you'll be able to access the Portainer UI. I'm going to mount the Docker socket of my host, which is my laptop, inside the Portainer container, so Portainer can actually communicate with Docker. And I'm going to use the Portainer/Portainer image. That's it, simple as that. So you just have to run the container, and now you can access Portainer on port 9000 on your host. So which is on my machine. The first thing we'll ask you when you access Portainer for the first time is to define an administrator password. So I'm just going to define a password quickly. That's it. And then log in. Good. The first time you log in, we will ask you what Docker environment do you want to manage. So, so here you have the choice to actually specify the IP address or domain name for URL for your Docker environment. If your Docker, if your Docker cluster or host is protected using TLS, you can actually upload the required certificates straight from here. And you just have to give it a name and you just hit connect. The other option is to use the first one here. And what we're gonna do with this one is that we want to manage the Docker instance where Portainer is running. So on my laptop, I've got the Docker engine running. I've got Portainer deployed as well on this laptop. And so I want to use the Docker socket to communicate with Portainer. Let's hit that. And voila, you're connected to your Docker engine. So this is pretty much, yeah, actually it's better there. So this is the main dashboard that you will see when you connect to your Portainer, your Docker engine. So on the right side, you can see all the resources that are running in your Docker engine. So I can see that there's 6 containers, 31 images, volumes, networks. I've got a bit of information about the node. So this is the node, my laptop name with the Docker version, CPU, and memory. And on the left side, I can see the action panel. This is where you can access your containers, images, networks, and stuff like that. So for example, let's hit the containers panel, the containers view. Straight from there, you can have a list of all the containers running or stopped on your engine. So this is pretty much the equivalent of Docker PS, actually, on the CLI. So you can see the state of your containers, which image they're using, small details like IP address, if they expose some port or not. I'm going to leave aside the ownership part for later. So you can sort all your containers by name, image, stuff like that. You also get access to filters if you want to filter your container list. And you can as well select any container here and apply actions as you would do with the CLI. So you can stop, start containers, remove them straight from here. So obviously you can list your containers, but you can as well create containers. So you just need to hit the add container button. And from there, you access a view where you have to specify a few information about the container you want to create. So this is pretty much the equivalent of the Docker run command. So you'll be able to give a name to the container, an image, if you want to expose some port, stuff like that. So all the options that you can find on the CLI when you use Docker run, you'll be able to find them here. So you can map volumes, you got access to networks directly from here. So if you want, you can bind existing volumes. You can select the network on which you want to run your container. If you want to put environment variables, labels, the restart policies, stuff like that. So pretty much, we do not support every CLI option yet, because there is a lot of options in the Docker and CLI, but we're trying to bring them all. So you can list containers, you can create containers, but you can also inspect containers. So for example, you just have to click on the container name, and you'll be able to get some details about this container. From here, you'll be able to see IP address, status, stuff that we've seen before in the previous view. But you will be able also to directly create an image from it. So if you want, this is the equivalent to Docker commits. So if you want to take that container, supposedly you have an nginx container and you updated configuration inside your container, you can directly commit that and create an image straight from here. You also have details about the image, command use, environment variables, and in which networks. You can see that here. Your container is connected. You can also access straight from this view the stats view. So from there you have real-time information about CPU, memory, and network usage, as well as the list of processes running inside your container. You can access the logs view as well, where you can see the std out and std, the simple standard out logs and the error logs. At the moment, there's no logs inside this container. And the latest thing that you can do is that you can access a web console straight from your browser. So if you want to interact with your container, you can actually pick a command and just connect. This will display a console, which is the equivalent of a Docker exec, actually. So you can actually alter your container straight from there, for example. So this is Docker PS, Docker inspect, Docker stats, everything you can actually do with a CLI, but with an enhancement and a visual representation. So what you can do for containers, you can obviously do it for images. So this is pretty small on the screen there, but from here, from the images view, you can pull images. If your image is hosted on a specific registry, you can actually specify the registry. You can see all your images on your host with all the tags, the size, and you can filter and sort as well. You have access to details for an image, so you can manage all the tags of an image. If you want to push them, pull them, or just remove them, you can also create tags as well above in details. And you can pretty much do the same for networks, so you can actually list all the networks on your host straight from there and create a new network here, or if you need advanced settings, from this view you'll be able to create a new network with advanced settings. So it's pretty much the equivalent of Docker network create. It's available from here. And you can list volumes as well too. So we've got extra views for giving you information about your Docker engine, plugins installed on your host, a bit of information about the version and CPU and stuff like that, as well as Docker event supports, giving you all the information about what's going on inside your cluster. Inside your host, sorry. So, voila, this is pretty much what you can do with Portainer that you can actually do with the CLI, but with a graphical representation. We've added a few things on top of that, obviously. The first thing being the templates, so what we call app templates. So what are those? Those are pre-configured images that we picked ourselves and configure ourselves. So for example, when you click on nginx, you'll be asked to fill some information. Usually some of these are optional. So for example, here I could change the network in which I want to deploy an nginx container, and that's it. I could just hit create, and it would deploy an nginx container directly. The goal here is to be able to quickly deploy containers that you I don't know, you deploy frequently or stuff like that. These are pre-configured, meaning we already configured which port should be exposed, which volume should be mapped inside the container, and things similar. So it's probably going to pull the image right now, so yeah. Hopefully the connection is good. So we got a set of templates available from here. So you have Nginx, we got MySQL, Elasticsearch. All of these are pre-configured. So for example, if I want to deploy MySQL, all I need to fill is the root password. Just need to give that information and we'll deploy a MySQL container quite easily. You can also tune that. So as you can see here, we pre-configured that template to expose the 3306 port, which is the port on which MySQL listens. And we want a volume to be created and mapped onto the valid MySQL folder. So these templates, they can actually be These are dynamics, which means that you can actually replace this whole list of templates by yours if you want to. This is pretty much only a JSON file saying, okay, this MySQL template is going to be called MySQL. Description is going to be the most popular open source database. I want to expose that port and that port. I want to map that volumes and that volume. So if you have containers that you deploy quite frequently, for example, your application or stuff like that, you can actually create your own templates and upload them into Portainer. You can change that at startup, and you'll be able to use them straight from there. So this is for template view, and we've also added a way to manage multiple endpoints. So what do we call endpoints? The goal here is to be able to manage multiple Docker environments using a single Portainer instance. So I want to be able to deploy one Portainer instance and manage, I don't know, 3 or 4 development hosts, as well as two production clusters, for example, straight from the same view. Straight from here, you'll be able to define what are the other endpoints available in that Portainer instance. So for example, I'm going to connect to something that I'm going to call Swarm cluster. So I've got one running on my hosts at this IP address. If it's protected via TLS, you can actually add TLS certificate as well. I'm just going to add the endpoint, and that's it. I've created a new endpoint inside Portainer, and now, as you can see on the screen, if I go into the small Dropbox on the top of the screen, which is read and active endpoints, I can select my Swarm cluster. When I select it, it's going to refresh the view, and it's going to connect to the Swarm manager on my host. So the dashboard information changed a bit. As you can see now, it has detected that this node is part of a Swarm cluster, so it's going to tell me the node, the role of the node, and the number of nodes in the cluster. And I've got access to new views as well, as I'm connected to a Swarm cluster. So I've got access to the Swarm view now, which is going to show me all my nodes, all the nodes in my cluster. So it's going to show the name, the role of nodes, some information about CPU, memory, IP address, and the status. Straight from there, you'll be able to edit some details about your nodes, so you get access to details. You can see what's running on that node. You got a small description, and you can change the role and the availability of your node. Not the role, but the availability. And you got access as well to the service view, which allows you to manage Swarm services. So straight from there, you can create services, inspect services. So pretty much what you can do using container, you can do using services. So you're going to be able to create global or replicated services in your host. And these will be available in the container view. So from here, I can see I've got a service called Project Alpha Web 1 running. I can inspect that service. So I can edit a lot of things straight from this view, adding environment variables, labels, bind mounts and stuff. And in the container view, as I can see, there's one container related to this service which is running at the moment on that host. So okay, this is pretty much what you can do and how you can manage your Docker cluster and environment using Portainer. So I'm just going to switch back to the presentation. There we go. Cool. And I'm going to talk a bit about security. We recently introduced new features that are oriented to security. So things that are not present or available in Docker. So here we're going to talk about endpoint access management. So as I've shown you, you can manage multiple Docker environments straight from one Portainer instance. Now what we want to do here is to be able to say, okay, I've got 3 teams. For example, I've got 2 development teams and 1 production team. I want my 2 development teams to access those development environments, but these only. I don't want them to be able to access my production environment, my production cluster, or whatever. So we need to be able to restrict the access to our endpoints based on teams or users. We also like to be able to isolate resources. So containers, for example, if I got two development teams accessing one Docker environment, I want the team A to be able to create and run the containers, but with the team B not being able to manage or see these containers. So these would be totally isolated. This is what we're trying to do. So you can actually do that with the latest version. You can manage access on resources, which are containers, services, and volumes. So we introduce the notion of team and a new role, which is the team leader. So you can actually pick any user defined in Portainer and promote him to team leader, and he'll be able to, it's pretty much a regular user account, but it can also access the user creation view, so he'll be able to create new user and add them to the team. So pictures, this is what we actually want to achieve. So for example, on the left, I got one development host, and on the right, I've got one production cluster. What I want to achieve here is to have team A and team B be able to access that development host, and team C to be able to manage all the containers and services running on the production cluster. So we're going to say, for example, that team A and B is development and C could be operational. More than that, what we want to achieve is inside the same environment is to have this isolation. So being able to say, okay, team A is going to create and manage their containers, but team B is not going to be able to see them or manage them. And the same for team A. They won't be able to manage containers from team B. So I'm going to show you the role-based access control features that we recently introduced. For that, I've got a specific instance running. So, all right, I logged in as an administrator on my Portainer instance. As you can see there, I've got two endpoints defined. So I've got the dev standalone one endpoint and the prod cluster one defined. So you have two endpoints there. From this view, the user management view, I can list all the existing users on my Portainer instance. I can add new users as well. And I also got access to teams, which will list all the existing teams on my Portainer instance and give me the possibility to create new teams. So if I inspect those teams, well, go back to users. As you can see, I've got the administrator users, which is administrator, of course. So the admin user, I've got Jane, Michael, Thomas, and Bob, which I can see their role. Straight from this view, I can inspect each team and see what user is in which team. So as I can see there in the Project Alpha development team, I've got Jane and Thomas, and Michael and Bob are not part of the team. You can really easily add users or remove users from teams, so you just have to click add or remove, and you're going to switch people straight from there. You can also promote people straight from there. So if you want to make Michael a team leader in that team, you just have to push that. So I don't want Michael in that team, I'm going to remove him. So as you can see here, in the Project Alpha team, I've got Jen and Thomas. Jen is the team leader, and Thomas is a simple member. I've got another dev team, which is the Project Beta development team, in which there's only Bob. The goal, as I told before, is to manage accesses to these endpoints. So I've got my dev standalone one, which is my development environment. For these environments, I want to manage which user can actually access that environment. So I want, as you can see there, you have the list of all existing users and groups on the left, and on the right, the authorized users or groups. So from there, you can see that alpha and beta teams, development teams, are able to access this environment. And if I check the prod cluster, there's only the Project Alpha team that can access it. So who's part of that team. Prod Project Alpha. It's Michael. All right. So here, if I log in as one of the developers, for example, as Jane. So here, I logged in as Jane, which is part of the development Project Alpha team. As you can see, I gave access to only the dev standalone one host. So they don't have access to the production cluster. And in the containers view, for example, they can see a list of containers running. And this is where the ownership part is going to take actions. As you can see, there is a few containers running, so Project Alpha DB1 and Web1. Those are annotated as restricted, which means that only a set of people or user can actually manage this container. If you inspect the container, you'll be able to see in the access control panel that this resource, this container, is restricted, and that only the Project Alpha development team can manage it. So I'm not sure my internet connection works, but if I create a container, let's call it Jane1, I'm going to deploy an nginx container. And when you create containers or volumes of services, you've got access to this access control panel there. Straight from there, this is where you decide what you want to do with the access control on your resource. So if I want to make this resource private, which means only me, Jane, is going to be able to manage it, or if I want to share it with my team. Of course, a user can be part of multiple teams, so if Jane would be part of 2 teams, for example, when you click on restricted, you would have the choice to pick one or both teams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a private container called nginx. So as you can see there, it's private, it's called Jane1. So it's Thomas, I think Thomas is part of the same team. So if I log in as Thomas, which is part of the same team, I'll be able to see the Project Alpha DB1 and Web1 containers as I can access them as I'm part of the same team, but I can't see the Jane1 container because it's private to Jane. I've also got access to my Thomas Dev1 container, which is private and available only by me. And of course, public containers, they're available for any users that try to access these endpoints. So now if I log in as Michael, it's pretty much the same, but an example in the production. So Michael is part of the production team and can only access the production cluster. He cannot access the development cluster. And as well, when you create services and when you list services, you can only access services that you're allowed to use, to manage, to see. So this is pretty much the same. When I click on add service, I've got access to the access control panel, and from here I can choose if I want to apply an access control on that resource. Of course, as an administrator, you have access to all the endpoints, so all the Docker environments you got. You can also list all the containers, even if they're restricted to some teams or not. So from there, I can see all the containers actually running on that host. And you can as well change the access control on any resource. So if I want the Jane1 container, which is actually private to Jane only, I can change the end of chip straight from there. And if I want to, I can make it public so any user will be able to see it. I can make it visible and manageable by administrators only, or I can choose restricted and choose which users or which teams would be able to manage that resource. So this is the latest change feature we actually introduced in Portainer related to access control. All right, let's switch back to the presentation to finish. So now I'm just going to talk a bit about what's coming next in Portainer. So roadmap for the current year. We're going to add task schedulers soon. Well, the first thing we're going to work on is actually Docker Compose support, because we don't actually support it at the moment. So we're going to give you the ability to create a stack, deploy a stack from Docker Compose YAML files. We're going to add a task scheduler right inside Portainer, which will give you the ability to deploy a container, start, stop container at a specific point in time, pull an image, stuff like that. Scale a service, for example, in the morning and downscale it back in the evening. We're also going to introduce LDAP support now that we have the notion of teams and users, as well as an official support for ACS, so Azure Container Service, and Docker on AWS. A few users actually managed to make Portainer works with that, but we want to create an official support for these. We're also going to work on a few things such as private registry management, giving you the ability to manage your Docker registry straight from Portainer interface. So you'll be able to list your image and manage all your images. And we want also, in the future, be able to extract metrics from your nodes and give you information about CPU, memory usage on your nodes, stuff like that. This is coming next. Few useful links before I finish. So website is portainer.io. You'll find pretty much all the information of stuff I said here. You also have access to our public demo if you want to try it, but you don't want to deploy it. So it's demo.portainer.io. The credentials are on the website. Our documentation is hosted at docs.portainer.io. So there's a lot of documentation here. You can find about deployment, configuration. The main thing, our GitHub repository. So yeah, Portainer is open source. If you're using it and you find the bug, please just open the issue here, and we'll try to fix it as soon as possible. If you're using it and you think that something should be added, you think about a new feature, you can also create an issue there, and we'll discuss it straight there. We got our Twitter handle, which is Portainer.io, if you want to follow news. And we do support as well on Slack and Gitter. So if you have any questions, if you're stuck with something with Portainer, you can just head into one of these rooms, and if we're not here, we got a pretty big communities there. It's like 300 people right now in this Slack room, so they'll be able to help you also. Voila, this is the end of my talk, so if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
We have time just for 2 questions, so if you want to make questions, si queréis hacer alguna pregunta, os traduzco.
I'll be available later if you have any questions anyway. So.
Okay, so thank you very much, Anthony.
Gracias.